Welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. Tera Roberts here along with Pat Fitzmaurice and Billy Muzio. And today is our ranking show for wide receivers. We're going to be going through the Fantasy Pros ranking tiers for week 5. Pat and Billy are going to be providing their thoughts on players in the tiers, and it is a fantastic pair that we've got here to do the analysis on our ranking shows. We are very blessed because Billy was the number 4 overall most accurate in-season fantasy football ranker in 2022, and he has consistently done well in our accuracy competition. You guys, of course, know Fitz was the most accurate in-season weekly ranker in 2020 and has been consistently among the most accurate rankers in fantasy football. You can find Billy at FF Muzio. You can find Pat at Fitz_FF, and you can find me at It's Tera Time. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive right in because we have a ton to cover. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe and also turn on notifications as well. Now, we've got our top 20 players, or top 20-ish players, our consensus rankings and tiers. You can find them over on fantasypros.com/rankings, and you can go see the tiers on the video podcast at youtube.com/fantasypros. All right, this covers a solid group, our top 20 here. Billy, I'm going to start off with you. Is there anything that really stands out here in the top 20 players for you?
I'm going to go back to Puka Nacua again because we have the possible return of Cooper Kupp again, and this has been a guy who's been breaking records, shattering records left and right, and it's been anything short of amazing that what he has done. But this offense, like we mentioned in the running back podcast, is going to have a real different look when Cooper Kupp returns. What is that going to look like? How much are we going to see Cooper Kupp take away from Puka Nacua? Is he going to remain a back-end wide receiver 1? Are we going to see high-end wide receiver 2 production? There's a lot of questions to be answered because we know that Cooper Kupp is trusted by Stafford, and I'm not quite sure he plays this week because the reports out of camp this week were that he's not quite there yet at 80%, and if it's taken him 5 weeks now to get close to 80% off a hamstring injury, I'm not quite certain that he's going to be there in the next 3 or 4 days. And so if he's not there, then I think Puka Nacua is probably inside the top 8 again at the receiver position. But if he is in, then it really changes the dynamic of this offense, and it's going to be one of those players that's going to be really hard to rank because we could see a target share just be completely taken away from him based upon the chemistry that he has had with Cooper Kupp.
So much that could happen here. We might have to wait to see what's going to happen for when Kupp returns. But yeah, Puka has been off to an incredible start. And Pat, what stands out to you here?
The rankings respect being afforded to 3 players. One is Puka, as Billy just mentioned, and nice to see that he's still top 10, even with the possible threat of Cooper Kupp returning and cutting into that target share a little. Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver 13. I know it's a bye week, so players are getting pushed up in the rankings a little bit, but people are recognizing what a star Brandon Ayuk is turning into. This guy is just such a baller. I mean, runs great routes, tough after the catch, great at the catch point, blocks his tail off, just all around terrific player. And then finally, one of my favorite low-key breakouts of 2023 so far, Nico Collins, cracking the top 20. And, I'm up here in Big Ten country, saw him a lot at Michigan. He flashed at Michigan. Like, there were times when it's like, okay, this guy could maybe be a decent NFL receiver. But, man, he is playing so well right now. What a beast Nico has turned into after the catch. Like, he is just so hard to bring down once he has the ball in his hands, and good route runner too. I'm just sad I don't have Nico on a single one of my teams. I assumed the Houston passing game would not be good enough to make Nico fantasy viable this year, and big whiff for me on that one.
Yeah, I was heavy in Nico on best ball, and for some strange reason that didn't translate to redraft. I don't know where the logic was in that, if it left me once I hit August, but hey, you know what? I take the best ball shares where I can get them. All right, guys, again, for in-depth analysis on these players, go to fantasypros.com/rankings, and for updated rankings, use our My Playbook app. Now we're going to go ahead and jump down we'll start off here with the B tier for guys that we're going to dive into. This is a good tier that we're going to go over and discuss multiple players in. We've got Gabe Davis coming off of 3 touchdowns in a row, 3 straight games. Very Very unlike Gabe Davis. Maybe he has a new transition for Gabe Davis. The boom, boom, boom bust, particularly. Marquise Brown, we've got here as well, after a strong performance. Christian Watson, who returned last week in limited workload. DeAndre Hopkins, Jakobi Meyers, Adam Thielen, and then the Cooper Kupp that we have talked about, the potential for him to return as well, closes out that tier. We're going to start off here talking about Gabe Davis. ECR has him at wide receiver 24. Pat, you've got him at wide receiver 25. Billy, you've got him at wide receiver 39. So you're in the, yes, we've got boom, boom, boom. And this is the bust game, according to Billy, right here for Gabe Davis. Billy, talk to us first about this.
You know, I was talking with Pat off air about Gabe Davis. This is just one of the guys that's very, very hard to rank and project based upon the analytics, because he's only seeing about 14% of the target share on the season. We've seen week 1, he only had 10%. Week 2, he spiked to 20%, but we've seen 14% in week 3, 13% in week 4. Routes ran last week was actually his lowest routes ran at 76%. And so analytically, very hard to project, but his touchdown rate is just extremely high is what it is. And so anytime you have a player like this, it can completely demolish your projection model. And it's one of those guys that every single week, it's literally one of the top 3 players that I circle every single week and look at it and say, is this right? And I have to kind of take a different approach than just analytics to it. I have to look at the matchup. I have to take a look at the cornerbacks that are in. I got to take a look up at what they've given out the opposing defense has given up to the receiver out wide versus in line. And then I got to manually adjust it because it's just analytically, it just breaks my model. And so I'm not comfortable where I have Gabe Davis right now. Like I was telling Pat, like last week, it came in at like wide receiver 44 to begin with. And I adjusted manually and adjusted up and got him to close to wide receiver 30 and still was like, man, this is either going to really hurt me still or it's going to pay off. And it hurt me again. And so I think that we're looking at a similar week this week. Jaguars aren't necessarily pushovers at the position. And so they do give up more points out wide than in line. So this could be a Gabe Davis week versus a Stephon Diggs week. And so I'm going to be manually adjusting this number up. I don't know where it's going to finish, quite frankly, right now, but I'm going to say it's going to be closer to the ECR number than where I'm currently at.
Pat, you've got him at wide receiver 25. What are your thoughts around Gabe Davis?
Yeah, well, I guess we know Billy is going to be cheering against Gabe Davis this week and sticking pins in his Gabe Davis voodoo doll. But I totally get where Billy is coming from on this one. Like, I generally do not like to draft or give a lot of rankings respect to players with this sort of profile. The guys who are derive so much of their fantasy value from big plays and do not have stable target shares, which is Gabe Davis to a T. But if I am going to bet on those types of players, I want them to be receivers in explosive offenses, check, with Gabe Davis. I want them to be guys who hit on those big plays pretty frequently, check. I think since December of 2021, Gabe Davis has scored 20 touchdowns in his last 28 games, playoffs included. I realize the target totals for Gabe Davis do not justify this sort of rankings optimism, with me having him just outside of wide receiver 2 range, but I am willing to live with the risk of a bad game for a player who taps into his upside as often as Gabe Davis does.
I get that. And then, maybe that's a perfect transition to the next player that we're going to talk about within this same tier. It's a kind of a boom bust type of tier that we've got here. Christian Watson, kind of that same, you talked about that profile of the type of player that Gabe Davis is. Now, granted, we saw a nice string there last season for Christian Watson where he had incredible production, but he does kind of profile as that same boom bust type of player. We have Romeo Doubs, who I was shocked. I do a waiver wire video, top 10 waiver wire video for Fantasy Pros every Monday. And as I was making it, and I'm going through and looking at players, I was shocked at how low rostered Romeo Doubs was. I didn't think he would qualify for the list, but he actually did. Because I guess maybe people believe so heavily in Christian Watson. But Romeo Doubs has been averaging. I mean, he's had 3 18 fantasy point games, and we've got Christian Watson coming off of this limited performance where he did get the touchdown. But again, we've got a guy who, much like Gabe Davis, is that boom bust, needs a touchdown kind of profile. ECR has him at wide receiver 26. Pat, you've got him at wide receiver 31. Billy, you've got him at wide receiver 39 or 29. So, I mean, we're kind of congruent here on this kind of thought process as well, with Christian Watson still working back off of that injury and that boom bust profile that he's got right there. Pat, I'm going to start out with you. What are your concerns around Christian Watson?
Romeo Doubs, Tara. That's a big concern. Like you hit on it. Doubs had 9 catches for 95 yards on 13 targets last week against the Lions. 25 targets for Doubs over his last 2 games. And the Packers have some good pass catchers elsewhere too, with the 2 rookies, Jaden Reed and Luke Musgrave. So, I can't get Watson any higher than mid-range wide receiver 3 in my rankings. I do expect a heartier snap share for him this week. He only played 46% of the Packers' offensive snaps last week, and Tara's a fellow Packers fan. You know the Packers are really conservative when it comes to injuries, when they bring their guys back, how much work they give them upon their returns. And we saw that with both Christian Watson and Aaron Jones last week as, their roles were sort of curtailed in their first games back from hamstring injuries. I do think Watson will play more. And, this guy's a touchdown scorer. We saw him save what could have been a disastrous day for his fantasy investors, or at least the ones who chose to start him last week, with a short, late touchdown catch that kept him from having a really poor fantasy day. But, touchdown dependence and not knowing quite what the target share is going to be, that's the uncertainty with Watson this week. That's why I'm not all that high on him.
Billy, how about you?
It's another one of those players that's very hard to project. This is exactly what Pat just said. It's kind of like a Gabe Davis 2.0, but not on as good of an offense. But the Packers have been surprisingly efficient this point to the season. So I think Watson does see more snaps. I think he's going to see a lot more workload. Very accurate when Pat talked about the conservativeness of the Packers. And I think that they start to ease him back in as the weeks continue, as long as there's no setbacks in practice. And so we did see a 12% target share last week. He only ran 48% of routes. I think we can consider that closer to 70% in the route department, probably get more of the 18% target rate. I do think that Romeo Doubs is probably the number 1 until further notice, at least until Christian Watson is I think kind of clear of the injury, and I don't think we're clear yet in terms of Packers logic. And so Doubs has been really, really, really efficient. We've seen him with 3 top 13 finishes inside of half PPR. He's only had 1 week outside, and that was wide receiver 80 in week 2, but he was wide receiver 10 in week 1, wide receiver 13 in week 3, wide receiver 13 in week 4. So very efficient, has been seeing a bulk of the targets, and has been capitalizing on the absence of Christian Watson. And I don't think that that's just going to disappear when Watson returns to a full capacity.
I'm with you guys. Before we jump into our final player within this tier, said it was a jam-packed tier, so we've got one more to go through. Fall is officially here, and that means it's my favorite time of year, time for tailgating, and the only thing that is better than tailgating is tailgating with Miller Lite. Miller Lite is the 96-calorie beer that tastes like beer and is perfectly brewed for everything fall has to offer. Miller Lite is the perfect light beer for all beer lovers. As soon as you take a sip, that day, the food, the conversation with friends, it just gets instantly better. Whether you're at a game or watching the game at home, live those autumn moments with Miller Lite and let the great taste of Miller Lite hit your taste buds so hard you feel it in your heart. With a Miller Lite in your hand, autumn doesn't just taste great, it tastes like Miller time. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/FantasyPros. That's MillerLite.com/FantasyPros. Or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per 12 ounces. All right, guys, we are going to jump back in here with the final player that we're going to talk about in this tier, Jakobi Meyers. ECR has him at wide receiver 28. Pat, you've got him at wide receiver 38. Billy, you've got him at wide receiver 33. He is coming off of that poor game, unfortunately, where he just didn't connect with Aiden O'Connell. Pat, we'll start off with you. What are the problems that you have with Jakobi Meyers?
So first of all, Tara, let me preface this by saying I do like Jakobi Meyers. not trying to bag on him who he is as a player. And I remember his rookie year, seeing him in the preseason and being like, wow, who is this guy? But I think expectations have kind of gotten out of line for Jakobi Meyers. 2 touchdowns in week 1. That's part of it for sure. 16 catches for 166 yards over his first 2 games. What I think people are forgetting is that Meyers has never, ever been a big play guy. And we used to know Jakobi Meyers as the man who was incapable of scoring a touchdown. He had that ridiculous streak of games without a touchdown, finally ended it, and has been getting into the end zone a little more regularly, but still 10 touchdowns in 63 career games, regular season. With that sort of production profile, not a lot of big plays, not a lot of touchdowns. You need heavy target volume to be a useful fantasy asset. And Meyers got that in his first 2 games, but let's not forget that he is sharing a field with Davante Adams, one of the most prolific target hogs in the NFL. There are going to be weeks when the target volume just isn't there for Jakobi Meyers. That's my fear with him.
Billy, do you share those same concerns?
I share some of the same concerns. I think it just depends upon who's a quarterback as well, because when we saw Jimmy Garoppolo in, this was probably the clearest target tree there was in the NFL between Davante Adams, Jakobi Meyers, and of course Josh Jacobs. If we can see that clear of a tree week to week with Jimmy Garoppolo in, then I think that's going to prop up Jakobi Meyers' fantasy value, because he probably is going to see that close to 10 targets per game. We saw 10 in week 1, 12 in week 3. Last week, Aiden O'Connell only saw 4, so just wasn't the chemistry to kind of piggyback off what Pat said. That being said, I do think that it's very dependent on the quarterback situation. But let's not forget they're facing Green Bay this week, and they have Davante Adams, who's going to be probably getting a lot of Jair Alexander treatment. And I do think that we probably going to open up the field a little bit more for Jakobi Meyers. So we'll watch the camp reports, we'll watch news coming out of the Raiders, and see if Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy or not healthy this week. Because if it's Aiden O'Connell, then this number is going to definitely go down closer towards Pat.
Yeah, I think all of that makes sense. We'll move on to our next tier, the B- tier. We've got Tank Dell coming off of a disappointing game where he took a backseat to Nico Collins. We'll see if he can bounce back here. Cortland Sutton, Romeo Doubs, who we talked about in detail when we talked about Christian Watson, Jordan Addison, and Tutu Atwell. I want to stop here quickly at Jordan Addison. If I recall correctly, both of you were lower than consensus on Jordan Addison, and it turns out you could have been even lower, like at the very bottom, unfortunately, because Jordan Addison, that is where he was. Pat, real quick, Jordan Addison, I assume we're expecting some kind of bounce back here from 0, but to what level are we kind of expecting for him?
Yeah, good player, but the thing is he is still playing behind KJ Osborne, not being on the field in 2 receiver sets. So he's playing in 3 receiver sets. It just means he's playing, getting snap shares in the 60 to 70% range as opposed to the 85-90% range. So it's going to chip away at his upside a little bit. Still a really good player. I still think he's like a wide receiver 3 flex consideration every week. But until we see Addison supplant KJ Osborne in 2 receiver sets, and I think he should, he's the better player. But until we see that, I'm going to be a little cautious with the rankings for him.
I think that makes sense. Billy, how about you?
Yeah, Addison is definitely playing only in 3 receiver sets. 75% of routes on the season, where Osborne's seen 94, Justin Jefferson's seen 99. Isn't getting the target share that we would hope for out of him either. 13% on the season. He only saw 6% last week. But this week if there's going to be a week where he's going to score or potentially have more targets, it's going to be this week against Kansas City. And so we have, of course, the one of the highest over-unders of the week. I think it is the highest over-under at 52. So implied total for Minnesota right now is at 23.25. And so I do think that we're going to see a pretty high scoring game, and this could be another touchdown game for Jordan Addison, as the target on the field is going to be Justin Jefferson from a defensive standpoint.
Moving on to the C+ tier, we've got Jerry Jeudy, Jahan Dotson, Michael Thomas, and Drake London. It's a ho-hum tier right here. I want to pull out for just one quick second for us to discuss Drake London, who was saved by a touchdown, but it's just so tough with that Atlanta offense. You want to lean into Drake London and the talent, but it's so difficult to trust him and the level of volume that we're getting out of Desmond Ridder. Billy, do you have any kind of trust level with Drake London at this point?
I don't have any trust with anybody in Atlanta right now. It's just Arthur Smith is just maddening as a coach. Just not utilizing anyone. Ridder doesn't look good. We're seeing, the fewest attempts inside the league, and so it's a pretty tough situation, especially from a projection standpoint, because we just don't know. We're relying on touchdowns right now with one of the lowest touchdown rates out there in the league right now, and so London is a guy, talent-wise, should be like a top 25, 26 receiver every single week. But based upon the situation that we're in right now, it's hard to get him inside the top 40. The matchup isn't great either. So Houston is pretty stout this year. We're giving up the fourth fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver, and they're even more stouts against receivers out wide, where we see London operate for the most part. So I have a lot of concerns this week about Drake London. The touchdown got me last week, though, because if he didn't get that touchdown, he's outside the top 50 of the position. And I had him at like wide receiver 44. He finished as wide receiver 31 in half-point PPR just because of that touchdown. And we'll see what he does this week, but not looking promising for Drake London.
Pat, how about you? Are you trusting Drake London?
Admittedly, it is hard to, Tara, with an offense as run heavy as the Falcons are, and when the target delivery mechanism is Desmond Ridder, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. I know as a heavy London investor, I'm kind of hoping Taylor Heineke gets his shot here. And here's the thing, like the Texans have a run funnel defense. Like their run defense is always so perennially bad. That's part of, I think that's more why they look good sometimes against the pass, is simply that teams just don't choose to throw against him that much. And it's not like you have to invite Arthur Smith to have a run-heavy game plan. So I don't know. We could see like a 60-40 run-pass split this week for the Falcons, if not higher. But I'm always going to be above ECR, I think, on London, just because I'm such a big believer in the talent. Maybe he doesn't always get the targets we think he deserves, but man, this is a guy who had 72 catches as a 21-year-old rookie. And for a talented young man like this to just ball out at such an early age, I'm going to keep betting on the talent here and hoping it gets better than 31.5 receiving yards per game. And, it was better than that last year. I'm hoping they can at least get London's target share back to what it was last year.
Yeah, you're right. It was better. We expect a little bit more, especially with that tiny sample size we had of Desmond Ridder. I feel like we got bamboozled just a little bit there. Moving on to the C tier, ton of players in here. We've got Jaden Reed, who obviously we talked about when we were talking about Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. We've got Rashee Rice, another rookie coming on a little bit strong, getting pushed up a little bit here. Michael Wilson, another rookie. Rashid Shaheed, always a deep threat. Tyler Boyd potentially stepping up here with T. Higgins, dealing with a rib injury. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Josh Downs, Sky Moore, and Robert Woods closing it out. I want to talk here for a second about Michael Wilson, and we'll just do this real quick here. Michael Wilson coming off this breakout rookie performance here. 2 touchdowns. Receptions were strong. Caught all of them. 7 for 7. Yardage was good. I mean, this was wonderful to see out of him. Joshua Dobbs performing at a strong level. And this is, fantastic to see out of him. And he's now pushed up into the C tier. The question I want to ask here, and I'll start off with you, Billy, do you believe that has he surpassed, like by clear, no questions, has he surpassed Rondale Moore for you? Or are you officially seeing him as the wide receiver 2 in this offense?
I see them as like 2A, 2B. I don't think we can officially say he's the number 2. He pretty much just matched his season totals last week and just week 4. It's one of those weeks where the defensive attention was elsewhere and he just happened to be the open man on the field based upon coverages. So I'm not entirely convinced that Michael Wilson, this is what we're going to see moving forward. It's one of those games that people will probably chase all year from Michael Wilson, hoping to get it again. And I'm not quite certain it happens.
Yeah. Pat, how about you?
I understand Billy's reservations. I do think they have incentive to try to keep Michael Wilson on the field since he is he's a big receiver. They don't really have that with Marquise Brown and with Rondale Moore. He gives them size. And it's funny, if you look at the college profile, Michael Wilson and Puka Nacua are pretty similar. Guys who really impressed and put some good stuff on tape when they weren't hurt. Both guys were hurt a lot in college, and I think it sort of surprised people that Michael Wilson was drafted as early as he was. Some people maybe thought he was going to be like a seventh round type. So I like him, but I do think there are limitations to the Arizona passing game that make him a very nervy start in fantasy.
I lie somewhere in between you guys. I won't ignore the rookie breakout. He's someone that I want to grab or was tried to grab off of waivers. At the same time, Marquise Brown still appears to be the alpha in that offense, did have the higher target share there. And, we're just hoping that Michael Wilson can kind of push himself forward. Very, very intriguing player. Moving on to the C- tier there, we've got Brandon Cooks, Josh Reynolds, Kendrick Bourne, Josh Reynolds potentially having to deal with Jamison Williams coming back, DJ Chark, Curtis Samuel, who had a strong game last week, Marvin Mims, KJ Osborne, who we talked about a little bit when discussing Jordan Addison, Darius Slayton, and Michael Gallup. I want to touch here real quick on Marvin Mims. He is someone that if you just look across Twitter, everybody is discussing. They want to talk about Marvin Mims and the output that he's been having and in his limitations. Do we realistically, Pat, I'll start off with you. Do we realistically think that Sean Payton is going to adjust and allow Marvin Mims anytime in the near future to have a higher snap count and higher target share within this offense? He has popped, but it's just so difficult to trust somebody with such a low usage rate.
I know, and I hope that changes, Tara, because I'm sick of telling people, no, you can't start Marvin Mims right now. He's run like 43 routes in the first 4 weeks, but he's got these efficiency numbers that put like Jerry Rice to shame. So like whenever he's getting targeted, he's making plays, but like you just can't trust it with the usage. So yes, I would like to see him become at least a regular in 3 receiver sets. Stop playing Brandon Johnson. Stop playing Little Jordan Humphrey. Just get Marvin Mims on the field more often and let him do his thing.
Little Jordan Humphrey. Billy, how about you? Are we thinking that we'll see anything from Marvin Mims, or is this just a hold situation here?
The analytics show that we did see a small shift and change in terms of 3 wide receiver sets last week. Prior to last week, we were seeing Brandon Johnson run close to 60% of the routes. He only ran 39% of the routes. Little Jordan Humphrey was about 23% of the routes, where he started off at 68 and kind of started tapering down from there from week 1. Mims saw a season high 39% of routes last week from 28 and 14% in the previous weeks. He is seeing a target per route run rate of 28%, which is good. It's actually the highest of the team. The unfortunate piece is he's only seen 8% targets in week 4. He saw 15% week 3 and 8% again in week 2. So if we can just get some more targets here, this is the kind of guy that's going to be consistently inside the top 40 at the position. But it's just it's one of those things that it's going to take time. He's got to earn the role. He's got to show consistency and probably win at the little things on the team. And the team has pretty clearly favored Cortland Sutton here throughout the season in that X receiver role in the Lombardi offense. So I do think that Mims has earned more snaps. I think he's definitely seen more snaps, but it's not as soon or as quick as we'd like it to be.
Moving on to the D+ tier, Devontae Parker, Darnell Mooney. In the D tier, Wan'Dale Robinson, who returned ish. A nice little game there in the chaos of the New York Giants. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Calvin Austin, Kadarius Toney, Nick Westbrook-Akina, who stepped up a little bit in the absence of Treylon Burks. Nelson Aguilar stepping up with the absence of Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman, and then Rondale Moore, who we talked a little bit when we discussed Michael Wilson earlier. I want to touch here real quick on Wan'Dale Robinson. We saw him pop briefly briefly last year before, again, suffered with injuries. It's something that he's dealing with off and on. But as long as he's on the field, do you guys kind of see any potential for him to not to put any faith in the Giants offense, but if there was anybody who was potentially going to slide into a wide receiver one role here, could it be Wan'Dale? Billy?
Yeah, so now I know why the Giants had like 14 slot receivers, because they knew their offensive line was going to be this bad and they weren't going to be able to, let routes develop and get down the field. But Wan'Dale, quietly came in last week and ran 63% of routes. He saw 20% target share. In terms of his efficiency, I mean, that's almost 3x what he ran in week 3. So he's clearly healthy. I think they're trusting it more here in the second week. And we're going to see what that looks like in week 5 now. But ADOT at 2.33. So this is going to help him in this category when this offense line is getting ran over like it did last week. And they're going to be able to get him the ball quickly and let him, operate with his quickness and get his yards after the catch. So it's definitely somebody I think is going to emerge as the wide receiver one of this offense, just because we have it's a hodgepodge mix of receivers. Jalen Hyatt really hasn't seen the field much. Paris Campbell hasn't done much with the touches he's had. Isaiah Hodgins hasn't done much. Darius Slayton hasn't done much. Even Darren Waller hasn't done much. Pretty much the entire Giants offense hasn't done much. So it's not saying much when I say that Wan'Dale Robinson will probably emerge as the wide receiver one. What does that mean on a week-to-week basis? It's not somebody that you can fully trust, but at least if he can get the targets, it's somebody that we can slide in the flex position.
Makes perfect sense to me. Pat, how about you?
Billy totally nailed it. Wan'Dale Robinson, he is going to be the best friend of a quarterback under duress because he is quick as a hiccup and can get open fast off the line of scrimmage. And I think we're going to see a lot of those little short area passes to him. Billy mentioned the low average depth of target. Look, I want to see Jalen Hyatt play more for the Giants too, but really, is Daniel Jones going to have time to find Jalen Hyatt on those deep routes that are Jalen Hyatt's specialty? I don't think so. So Wan'Dale does seem like he's going to have the most value of any Giants receiver going forward, which still isn't saying much, but it might make him at least a flex-worthy play as we move through the bye weeks.
Oh, the troubles of the Giants offensive line driving us all crazy. All right, we're going to move on to another segment here. We're going to talk another Who Would You Rather? And I like this one right here because this first one is two guys who the fantasy community just looks at and just, Cortland Sutton, Marquise Brown. We don't want to buy into either one of them, but they are two guys who have been performing above expectations, performing above their ADP. So who would you rather? This is a good one here. Pat, Cortland Sutton or Marquise Brown?
Pretty close call between guys who've been returning like wide receiver 2 value. I'm going to go with Hollywood Brown just because I think he has slightly more target security. I think with Denver, you're going to get Jerry Jeudy weeks. You're going to get Cortland Sutton weeks. You're going to get the occasional Marvin Mims week. But I think Marquise Brown is going to be a pretty consistent part of the Cardinals' game plan, and I think he's the more explosive playmaker than Cortland Sutton.
Billy, how about you?
Yeah, I have these guys really close inside the projections model. I probably lean Marquise Brown this week. I always, when we're this close, I usually flip a coin and go with either fate or the matchup. And this week, the matchup overrules faith because we have Sauce Gardner, who's probably going to see some Cortland Sutton this week. And this I don't really agree with the over-under on this game. I could see this game being a pretty low shootout. We just saw the Jets limit Kansas City. I don't think that Russell Wilson is going to really overcome this defense as much as the books are leaning on to be. So Marquise Brown for me, slight lean, but it is very close.
We are a 3 for 3 with Marquise Brown. Now this next one, Jordan Addison or Tutu Atwell. This one is an interesting one. We talked about Jordan Addison earlier and then Tutu Atwell again. This one is, we've got slightly, concerns in whether or not Cooper Kupp is going to come back. And obviously that would impact this question right here. But let's assume that Cooper Kupp gets one more week to heal that hamstring up. And this is Tutu Atwell as the wide receiver 2. Who would we rather? Billy, I'll start off with you. Jordan Addison or Tutu Atwell?
As good as Tutu Atwell has been, even if there's no Cooper Kupp, we do have Philadelphia this week, which is a very tough matchup. Jordan Addison, as we just discussed, has been pretty inconsistent and frustrating at times, but I love the over-under, love the matchup this week. So I'm going to go Jordan Addison against the Chiefs, just because I do think we're going to see a lot more 3 wide receiver sets this given matchup. So I lean Jordan Addison. It's very close for me, but I do think that the Philadelphia defense is pretty stout.
Pat, Jordan Addison or Tutu Atwell?
Billy framed it well. It's matchup edge for Addison, usage edge for Tutu Atwell. I've got Atwell by a nose, but I would pivot to Addison if we get news that Cooper Kupp is going to play and isn't on any sort of snap count.
Again, no debate here. I'm with you guys. Same reasoning there. Tutu Atwell, think he could have the higher target share, but again, just probably Jordan Addison, the safer pick there, giving the matchup. All right, we're going to do flex questions. Billy, Pat, I'm going to give you 3 players who fall into the flex zone. How would you order these 3 players? So we're helping out fantasy managers with those flex decisions because those are always the difficult ones there, trying to decide if you're going with the running back or the wide receiver or maybe even a tight end here. We'll start off with the first one here. Miles Sanders versus DeAndre Hopkins versus Romeo Doubs. Pat, I'll start off with you.
Oh, man. I'm going to take Sanders out of consideration because of the groin injury and that tough matchup against the Lions, who become so tough against the run. I like Hopkins a little more than Doubs. I know Hopkins investors are really frustrated right now, but not the best ecosystem for DeAndre Hopkins to be playing in. But I think he could absolutely smoke those young indie cornerbacks this week. So yeah. Edge to hop over Doubs this week.
That is a tough one there. I've been debating with myself in terms of how much we can trust. You mentioned those cornerbacks for Indianapolis. It's been a tough one trying to figure out how much we can trust DeAndre Hopkins. It's a good matchup, but it's just so, given the way that the Tennessee offense has gone, and they did find, again, their run game a little bit more with the strong game from Derrick Henry last week. So this one is a tough one for me. Billy, before I give mine, I want you to give me yours. Who are you going with? What's the order for these 3 players for you?
Yeah, it's actually very close. I agree with Pat. Sanders is off the table here. It's clearly between Doubs and Hopkins, and I know Hopkins hasn't been what we expected him to be, and this Tennessee offense has been struggling to move the ball down the field from a passing perspective. But news reports today is that Treylon Burks did not practice again. So if he remains out, I would probably say Hopkins again pretty clearly. But I do think that he's not 100%. He's still working off that ankle injury. And so that's why we've seen him, a bit kind of lacklustering inside of the efficiency department. I lean Hopkins ever so slightly, but I would not argue if somebody wanted to start Romeo here.
Okay, so you won't feel bad if I say Romeo Doubs, then DeAndre Hopkins is how I would do it. I appreciate that because I think that is the direction that I will go. All right, this next one here, A.J. Dillon versus Tyler Boyd versus Dallas Goedert. This one is an intriguing one here. I love how we're touching on these Packers players twice here. I know Pat's loving that. We wish maybe it was someone other than A.J. Dillon, but here we go. Billy, let's see. A.J. Dillon versus Tyler Boyd versus Dallas Goedert. How are you ranking these players?
I don't even know if Dillon is startable anymore. He has been extremely frustrating. So he's off the table altogether for me. He only had 11 yards last week. He saw 30. He has his season high right now is 55 yards on the ground. And so I am just removing A.J. Dillon out of my lineups altogether until further notice. So this one is pretty clearly between the receiver here. And I think I'm going to lean pretty clearly Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd is probably going to see a significant increase in target share because T. Higgins did not practice this week with that rib injury. Reports where he couldn't even lay down after the game. And so this type of injury is painful. It'd be hard to get his arms up and catch a ball. And if he gets hit again, anytime he could possibly leave the field. So Tyler Boyd pretty clearly for me. And if we do have no T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd could pretty sneakily be inside the top 24 at the position.
Pat, how about you? How are you ranking these guys?
I'm with Billy on Dillon. I think he's unplayable right now, and it looks like he's running in quicksand whenever he gets a handoff. But I'm going to go the other way. I'm going with the tight end here. And I know Goddard has been frustrating so far, and so frustrating that, Nick Sirianni is having to come out to the media and reassure them that they know that Dallas Goedert is still on the team and they haven't forgotten about him and that he's going to be more involved going forward. But I just think the Cincinnati passing game has been such a mess. And even though I do believe T. Higgins is probably going to be out this week, there were some times last year when one of the starting receivers for the Bengals was hurt and Tyler Boyd saw an expanded role and didn't really do a lot with it. Didn't really, have the splash game we were hoping for. Really good player, but I just don't want to invest in the Bengals passing game right now. So I'm going to go with Goddard.
I love this because, a lot of times people say, you automatically lean towards the wide receiver, but the tight ends can have value here too and be the better start. You bring up a really good point about Cincinnati. He could be the wide receiver too, but at this point, with the way that Joe Burrow is playing, struggling through that injury, there might not be a lot of value in that wide receiver 2 position. I still lean towards ranking this with Tyler Boyd and Dallas Goedert after that. And I am with you guys on AJ Dillon. I do a cut video for the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel later in the week. You guys should check that out. Spoiler alert, AJ Dillon will in fact be on that list. So I am 110% with you guys. The quicksand comment was incredibly accurate. By the way, guys, if you want a chance to win a signed Christian McCaffrey San Francisco 49ers jersey, courtesy of bettingpros.com, your place to start betting smarter and not harder, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video, and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. All right, that wraps things up for our weekly ranking show for wide receivers. If you want to see more advice from Pat and check out his rankings, just go to fantasypros.com/fits. You can find us on Twitter. You can find me at It's Tera Time. You can find Billy at FF Muzio. You can also check out his work. Be sure to check it out on Player Profiler. Tons of great content over there. And then you can find Pat as well on Twitter at Fitz_FF. All right. If you guys have any questions about lineups or trades or anything, obviously you can go to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel every single Thursday, 3 p.m. EST, 12 p.m. PST, taking your questions. That wraps things up for us, guys. For Pat Fitzmaurice, for Billy Muzio, I'm Tera Roberts. Thank you for tuning in.